Okay. Um, in no way, last but not least at all, in our long day, which actually has been super exciting to me, and I'm still energized. So uh, I'm hoping for a full, intense next hour. We are joined by Fernando Portal. Um Fernando, who, as some of others who have joined to me, I'm happy to call a friend. In addition to someone that I admire his work and the work that he collaborates and participates with others. Fernando is works as an artist and researcher, and I'm paraphrasing his bio between intersecting design and politics. He is the director of the Núcleo Lenguaje y Creación, a multidisciplinary practice-based research center at the Universidad de las Américas in Santiago, in Chile, and a founding member of Mil Metros Cuadrado, an art collective focused on the intervention of public spaces through conversational practices. And one of the reasons that I try to also put close to each other, Amira and Fernando, is for with Mil Metro Cuadrado, Fernando have done also a project that directly engages with language as a material, as a memory, as a narrative. And we may or may not hear a little bit of that. But so I'm extremely happy to be joined by Fernando. I will mostly just pass it on to him. But I do want to say also that Fernando comes from the field of architecture and has expanded his practice into this kind of multidisciplinary research, arts, cultural institution space that I think is super relevant to the kinds of discussions that we're having today. So, Fernando, thanks so much.
Marcelo, thank
It's
you.
it's this is getting to the end, but you're 2 hours ahead or from ourselves, so it's late for you. But so thanks also for holding on to your day until now. So I'll
No, thank you for this invitation, and thanks to everyone that is involved with this project. It's been a really beautiful day, just to be surrounded by all your voices on thoughtful projects, on labs. I'm in Santiago right now. We have spent. I am English Fernando, so there are some differences from my everyday Fernando that it's in Spanish. But here in Santiago, we have spent 1 month in lockdown, and of course, a year of social restrictions. So it's very new to be surrounded by new voices and unforeseen conversations and subjects, and it's been a really nice experience. So congratulations for this marathon of conversations. I want to share two projects with you. I have also, as Marina, a very long presentation, so please feel free to interrupt me in order to privilege the conversation and not the monologue that I may create by sharing this. Although, even if there are two very different projects, I think that they share this reading that you proposed as the commons as something that appears. I think they both relate with the creation of some kind of collectivity by means of things in public, of thinking, reading, writing, and developing objects that can be part of the public realm. The first project, it's part of my work with an interdisciplinary arts collective that it's called Mil Metros Cuadrados. That's the Spanish for 1,000 square meters. That was the area of a building of space that we manage, self-manage during 1 year in Santiago, and where we created some of the practices that I want to share with you. My partners in that collective are now scattered through the world. So Pedro Sepúlveda, it's in Mexico, Constanza Carvajal and Cote Contreras are in Germany, both in Weimar and in Berlin. Cecilia Moya, it's in Switzerland, and Hugo Cortés is in Spain. So we haven't been in the same space for like 2 years now, but we had created new platforms to continue to collaborate in this project. So this is something that we have made as a collective. So I will share my screen. You're seeing the full screen?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you.
With a big question.
Okay. So what would you ask yourself? What would you do differently? Dublin, Ireland, 2018. What would you ask Europe? Do you want inclusion or capitalism? Dresden, Germany, 2016. What question is urgent to ask? Why there is no equality? Barcelona, Spain, 2019. What would you ask the future? Will machines ever replace us? Essen, Germany, 2017. What would you ask the future? Does money still exist? Berlin, Germany, 2018. What would you ask your city? Why there is so much racism? Mallorca, Spain, 2016. Why would you ask yourself? Why do I think of demons? Quarteira, Portugal, 2019. What would you ask the future? Will some men let women walk safe? Madrid, Spain, 2018. What would you ask the border? Where is jail? Rivera and Libramento in the border between Uruguay and Brazil, 2017. What would you ask your neighbor? Do you think we share everything? Lac Le Mans in the border between Switzerland and France, 2017. What would you ask the future? What would the world look like? Dajabon in the border between Haiti and Dominican Republic, 2019. What would you ask your state? Why there is so much violence? Punta Arenas, Chile, 2016. What would you ask Northsiders? Where should I live? Dublin, Ireland, 2018. What would you ask your landlord? How expensive was the apartment 2 years ago? Berlin, Germany, 2018. What would you ask Cariocas? When will we learn how to vote? Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, 2016. What would you ask your government? Why don't you listen to those who voted for you? Santiago, Chile, 2016. What would you ask America? Why are you selling the Amazon? Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, 2016. What would you ask your city? Where are the detainees disappeared? Montevideo, Uruguay, 2017. What would you ask your parents? Father, why did you post on Facebook that it wasn't a coup d'etat? Botucatu, Brazil, 2017. What would you ask Europe? Why have you killed so many indigenous peoples? Madrid, 2018. What would you ask the future? When will you remove the big white fence? Berlin, 2018. What would you ask your government? Who won the election? Riga, Latvia, 2020. These are some that we have created during the last 5 years, maybe 6 years, working on this project that asks for questions, and that it's called the Question Project. And it all started from some methodologies that we developed while we're working on self-managed space here in Santiago. It all started in 2013. It was a very organic moment in which different people from very different backgrounds and disciplines and perspectives on life and on the meaning of community had the opportunity to meet ourselves in this space that will somehow define our destiny, even if we didn't have that knowledge yet at that moment. So a group of activists and architects managed to get this space for 1 month for free. And they decided to open it asking people with a question, what would you do with this space for 1 month? And that initial question was answered by all participants writing on the walls of this space. And 1 month was followed by another month and another month and another month. And we spent in that place for a full year. And during that year, we continued to invite others to make events, conversations, seminars, parties, book launches, exhibitions, workshops, but we always ask them to think of a new way in which to engage with that community. We didn't want to foster focal projects, focal conversations. We wanted to make things more horizontal. And we started to design some ways in which we can foster that kind of communication. And the tool that we started to develop was to make questions. That in the second before you give an answer, your ideas are still moving, you know. And if we are able to rest on that movement, just to stay in that moment in which your presumptions, prejudice are not yet put into play, we can find a place in which we can meet, you know, a political space of ambiguity in which we can come to terms, especially in a moment of very polarized political visions. So with that in mind, we took these letters out of the walls of this space and created this device with a hand printed version of an Helvetica font and a very clear and simple methodology. Always ask for a question. Always start with a question that can only be answered by another question, and going to the streets to ask people for new questions related to this subject. So after 1 year of using this space was demolished, and we took these methodologies out to the street. At the same time, we moved to another space in the same building that we were using, but I think that to cover that experience will be a part maybe of another presentation. So, as I was saying, we took this practice to the street. We had a workshop. We developed this typographic set this metallic structure and start to work with this set almost in a guerrilla style for the first half a year. Going to neighborhoods, engaging with their communities, using this conversational tool as a way to manifest, visualize, and gather which a collection of communal and common inquiries and concerns. So, and this later became some kind of an artistic practice, and we wanted to focus always on conversation. So this is something that it's conversational in its main logic, and it's also a kind of performatic piece. You know, just go to some place and start and spend the day, as we have done today, just talking to everyone, to as many people as possible. You know, some of them will say no, 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 and they will keep walking on the street. But in some occasions, you can really engage with someone and start opening these questions with them. You know, and at the same time that we started to develop these conversations, the community that started to gather, or that was in use of that space, understood that they have a display to visualize the urgent questions on the public space. So Question Project, it's ultimately about a conversation. It's a conversation between two unknown partners that meet around this question and start writing new questions, but also reading the questions that have been gathered during the day and selecting some of the questions gathered to be staged in this structure. This conversational and performatic approach to political exchange in public spaces has led us to develop also different kits for this methodology to be independent of our bodies. You know, I mean, on the one hand, we have developed a lot of activations in public spaces. I think by now there are around like 150. Now we are looking for materialities and methodologies that can deliver this project as a package, you know, for someone else to use it and to activate this kind of conversations. So this is the first toolkit that we developed in 2016. And on the other hand, all interactions have been until recently and they all respond to a face-to-face actual conversation that delivers this written testimony. You know, so at the same time that we have activated the project and created this visual archive of questions in public spaces, we have also gathered and collected this kind of archive of questions, you know, that by now they're reaching 26,000 questions in a lot of different languages. So this was the state of the project, I will say, by mid 2019, and the last year and a half have been have posed very urgent questions for those who have a practice that relates with public interventions, you know, and with conversational and relational practices in the field of art. how to intervene a public space in the context of lockdown. But in the context of Chile, that impossibility to reach public spaces again has a prior date. It changed before here because it was related to what I was referring previously as the social upheaval of October 2019. So at that moment, before the COVID crisis, we had a political crisis, a crisis that was also very beautiful. And in its beginning, this is a picture of the very massive protest in downtown Santiago, in the place where all manifestations gathered. And it was a time in which there was a very beautiful energy in terms of the use and the presence and the appearance, of something common in public spaces. That was the bright side of it. And a lot of this energy is the energy that actually was instrumental to start a process of writing a new constitution. But very rapidly, it achieved also and showed a very dark side, with a lot of violent incidents and also a very dark response from the state in terms of human rights violations. In the last year, some reports on human rights in Chile state that there were almost 20,000 detainees, almost 3,200 people were injured by firearms, and firearms that were handled by the police and the military. So the public space became something that was contested, and it was the stage for a very violent manifestations, and I will say that for the last year and a half, the rule of law in Chile has varied, and we have spent also almost 1 year and a half in a curfew. So to think of artistic practices, of relational practices in public spaces has been quite a challenge. I mean, for a very active artistic scene that was making that kind of work in this context. So our first idea action in this context was to start working with some activists in the context of the protest in this place in downtown Santiago, in Plaza Italia, that was renamed as the Dignity Square by this movement. And these were some installations that we made some Fridays with a group of media activists that were inquiring, that were questioning the way in which all the Pacific manifestations were covered, but were also being transformed into something more violent. And as the rights were being in all these crises, we also find some places, interior spaces, in which to use this project to foster this critical view of what was happening. So this is an activation that we made asking, what would you ask democracy? And some of the questions that we collected were related to this feeling, of violence and insecurity and violence from the state. Could it be peace? Is peace possible without justice? how many more should die before things change? No, it was a very, it is a very critical moment in Chilean politics. And this was also the context in which some artists in Berlin invited us to make an intervention in like Alexanderplatz, and we used that to discuss the Chile's motto, you know, that it's by reason or force, you know, that's the thing that it's in our national emblems. So we also wanted to question that, you know. And it was in the middle of that crisis that the COVID-19 pandemic started. So we it was like maybe in 5 months, with a 5 months difference, that we see our spaces. This is the same space of the previous picture, empty, totally empty. You know, so in some way, curfew and lockdown were the only means that the government had at that time to regain control, you know, of the public order. And now you had this inability to actually intervene public space, to actually create some kind of political appearance in public spaces. So in this context, we were invited by a Brazilian curator based in Paris to develop, to think about public art in the context of lockdown. And we have never gone digital before with the project. We always, I'm sorry, wanted to foster physical, analog, face-to-face interaction, but as that it was anymore, we had to open some digital tools for that. So we decided to work with the community, with some organized neighbors in a very emblematic modern building that is close to Dignity Square. There are the Tajamar Torres. We had some acquaintances there. They gave us some WhatsApp number, you know, of neighbors that were organized, and we sent this invitation. You know, what question is urgent to do? We were invited to their WhatsApp, you know, networks, and they sent us their questions, and through Uber we sent them an envelope with the printed question for them to put in their window one Saturday afternoon at 11 a.m. You know, so with this simple instruments, we created this kind of intervention that took over the facade, you know, of all these buildings. So will the pandemic, will that be part of our memory? Who stole all answers? There will be justice. Will there be justice? Sorry. How many more should die? And this was like the landscape of questions that were installed in the facade of these towers. So that experience became in the first half of last year became kind of a prototype for a more ambitious activation. We were invited by Unfinished to think of a global call, you know, to make more urgent questions, to gather more urgent questions. So we developed a website, kind of a digital toolkit, inviting people to respond to 3 different questions. What question would you ask yourself? What question is urgent to ask? what generative question is urgent to ask, as a tool to create new questions. So for this, we also developed a printed toolkit that we sent to a list of collaborators. And between October and February, we received around 500 different questions from 100 participants in 20 countries and maybe like 30 different cities around the world. And these are some of the results of this. I'm sorry. Of this experience of actually getting this toolkit to work beyond the reach of our bodies. What question is urgent to ask? Who owns the river? Assam, India, by Northeast Lightwolf Collective. I'm sorry. What question is urgent to ask? How many more? In Mission, Texas, by Vivian Gutierrez. I know that some of the collaborators of this project are here, so thank you to all of you for sharing this with us. What question is urgent to ask? Are we on time? Iquique, Chile, by Colectivo Caput. What question to ask? Are we statistics? At New York, by Adina Secretan. What question is urgent to ask? Who can you trust? In Wichita Falls, by Charlotte Scheuer. What question is urgent to ask? Why are the kids angry? At Assam, India, by Northeast Lightwolf Collective. What question is urgent to ask? What does it take? In New York, by 8 Ball Collective. What question is urgent to ask? What is my part? By Jim Hodges in New York. What question is urgent to ask? What is hospitality for you? By Makeup at Berlin. What question is urgent to ask? What history meets community? By Marcelo López and Tyreen. Thank you. What question is urgent to ask? What should we all learn? By Maria Paula Maldonado at Weimar, Germany. What question is urgent to ask? How can we foster mutually uplifting collaboration? Online projects in Pittsburgh. What question is urgent to ask? Can Facebook vote? By Northeast Lightwolf Collective in Assam, India. What question is urgent to ask? How do we write our constitution? By Francisca Benitez in New York. And what question is urgent to ask? Where will we go after the pandemic? By Isabel Esparza in Del Rio, Texas. With all the information that we have gathered, and also with all the findings and learnings from the different activities that the guests developed, we are now working on another toolkit, a toolkit that it's gathering all the information that we received, but also developing and specifying new ways in which to foster critical debate through the gathering and the provocation of new questions. And this is the first project, and I think that maybe we should leave it here.
I mean, it's I think we could do as you wish. Also, I know we have you have a side B of the disc, but I don't know. Maybe I think we have. I mean, we have 25 minutes. So I don't know if there is a condensed version of the second project, and then we try to make connections, because I also think it's a beautiful project, and we can bring other questions that are not related to something that we have discussed today. So yeah, maybe you can go ahead, and I'll save some of these questions for later.
Okay, perfect.
Just leave
I will
10,
try to
15
do it
minutes
like
for the
super
end.
fast.
Yeah.
Yes. And you will have to excuse English, Fernando. I think it's kind of rusty. So.
That's
I hope I'm not being too demanding. Okay.
all good.
So this is a very different project, as I was telling you before. But it's also a practice-based artistic research, and it goes like this. It's very common, you know, in literature to define this end of modernity in July 1972, during according to the demolition of the Pride Argo building. Just a few months before, in Chile, this building was being delivered to their jewelers, you know, and you can see that at the same time that Occidental first world modernity, it's coming maybe to an end. The manifestation of that developmental ideas in third world countries and periphery countries, using the language of the 70s, was just starting. And in the context of Chile, that period, you know, the early 70s, are related with the government of Salvador Allende, and a landmark political event in terms of that Allende, it remains the first and only democratically elected communist government. And that. So in that context, the whole country went through a very rapid and also violent transformation. A transformation that was triggered by the redistribution of the means of the creation of capital, you know. So at the beginning, for example, at the beginning of Allende's government, the state had a participation in 6 industries and enterprises that the same government was part of their creation. By the end of Allende's government, by means of the coup d'etat in September 1973, there were 507 industries that were all nationalized during those 3 years, on 2.5 years. So it was very violent in that sense, and in a lot of other senses. But the question about industry, about industrialization, was at the core of Allende's program. And this is before, this is just before the also violent process of neoliberalization that was developed by Pinochet's dictatorship. So what we are seeing here, it's the last manifestation of a developmentalist project that had as a main goal, of the main the idea of technological independency, you know. The idea was that peripheral countries will gain economic autonomy and will achieve development if they had the ability to create their own technologies, to develop their secondary and tertiary sectors of the economy, and not become what Linda had shown us earlier, just exporters of commodities, of raw commodities. So in this context, Allende's government called for created a department of industrial design within the Ministry of Economy, and they work on developing projects for these 507 industries to make, you know, creating also a new relationship with objects, you know, much in relationship with the idea of the comrade object, you know, of early communist Russia. So these designs were also a result of Gibbon Siepe's experience or participation in this process. Gibbon Siepe is a professor from Ulm, and all this heritage of functionalism and critical theory was also in the mix of what happened here. So this group developed different kind of objects. They work through all Allende's period, but none of these objects, except for this, a table were set, ever entered into production. So in the moment that the coup d'état occurs, all the prototypes are destroyed. Most of the documents were also destroyed, and all this collection, or all this archive of design products were banished, among with a lot of other things that happened in that context, along with a lot of other bodies that were also disappeared into that context. So these are some of the images that are the few images that survived this moment, you know. This is the bombardeo of the presidential palace, the bombing, yes, of the presidential palace. And this is like the whole collection of images that the original images that is the only thing that we had about these designs. These images are collected from around like 6 or 8 publications, mostly scientific specialized publications. So it remains a very unknown experience. And now we are in 2013. I was developing a research project for an exhibition, and I met with one of the designers of this. And at one meeting, he shares with me a set of documents that he salvaged from his office on the day of the coup. And these documents were amazing, you know, because they were like all the plans and the criteria for one choice and another choice, etc. So we decided to apply for public funding and use these documents as a way to recreate them in a strategy that I like to call like a heritage spiritism, you know. So with a group of artists, craftsmen, industrial designers, we worked for 3 years in order to recreate these prototypes. And these are the images of the reconstructed objects. You know, we developed and we experiment with different kinds of processes of definition. We started with the tableware, then with the furniture. And we also developed the electronics. You know, this is a calculator in which we had to reactivate old exchange routes between Chile and the Soviet bloc. You know, but now we were buying Nixie tubes with Visa cards via eBay in order to reconstruct those exchanges. And once we reconstructed this whole set of objects, that were around 120 different objects, there were some urgent questions for us too, you know, because these ideas were immaterial, you know, but in the moment in which they became an object, they also were subject of the risk of becoming a commodity. So the first question was the question about property. Who owns these these ghostly artifacts? And the strategy was to donate them, the first batch of all the collection to the Museum of Memory and Human Rights, where they are now part of their collection as a material. As a material object, and as a common property, also being that museum part of the public institutions in the country. And the other after project, I will say, it's related to the dissemination and the diffusion of this memory, because as there was no memory of these objects and this episode in Chile's modernity was in the blind spot. So the last years have been about how to make these objects enter historiography, and enter memory. So I've worked in a series of exhibitions, both in Santiago and in Argentina, and the late ones were in Germany, also relating this memory, these colonial exchanges between German modern tradition and Chilean socialist practices by mixing these materialities. And the last exhibition that it was intersected with the lockdown was an exhibition on the influence of Bauhaus in Chilean design, in which these objects were included by the curator, and it was quite amazing to see these ideas because of their new material quality, to actually be able to share its place in historiography among all these other projects that they also had a previous body. So that's everything I want.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll begin immediately here, and with this second project, mostly as a way to then maybe we just do the kind of jump back or question back. But I think this project, and I know this second project is a much more personal project than a collective as the beginning. I think what is beautiful about it it actually concludes with lots of questions, right? It's really a very kind of deep research project that really asks questions about commonality, about common property, common goods, but not in the sense maybe that some of the other discussions that we have had in terms of nature, in terms of resources, in terms of almost like a social human rights kind of origin. This is a project that asks questions about the things that we produce, and since they were part of, right, so it's almost like a way back to our initial presentation on institutions. These are objects defined, framed, conceived under a very specific form of institution, of a socialist institution that aim for we could say aim for a more kind of horizontal notion of distribution. And I think it's extremely fascinating to think about in that context who those elements belong to, right? And I think it's almost like, as you pointed out, right? Those are the questions that immediately emerge out of those. And I wanted to since I know that this is a presentation of more things that you have. What is the relation between the designers themselves, right? Because even though there is a designer that is being, let's say, employed by or participates in a state-owned enterprise, there is a direct link to specific forms of design, but also specific designers that actually draw these things and so on. And I wanted to ask if you have more insights on the relation between the production of them and the design of them, because I think there are two things there that are not necessarily, that maybe the question is not necessarily responds to the same answer. In terms of, there is a labor and production part of the socialist project, and industrialization, development, but there's also the kind of group that shaped, right, that designed those elements. So is there another a little bit more insight that you could give us in relation to that?
Yes, it's a very interesting question. I think it tells a line that it's full of contradictions, you know, and I think that's also very something very interesting of this particular experience, because on the one hand you had a project that it's very unique, you know, as the Chilean way to socialism, and on the other hand you had a lot of asymmetrical cultural exchanges, you know, between European modernity and the actual needs of peoples going through that process of communist transformation, you know. So I think that in that exchange, the differences between production and design are more critical, you know. And if you analyze the industrial platform of the country, uh, and against the factual production processes that were implied by some of these projects or some of the designs, you will see that are actually a series of contradictions. The use of plastics, the use of foreign matrices through the injection of that plastic into a specific machine, where are very specific places, but I think that are the moments in which these two projects somehow diverge, you know. So you have this very peripheral question about how to create a new material culture in socialism, but on the other hand, you have an answer, a very specific answer to that resembles German modern functionalist design from the 50s and 60s, you know. So there's something there that I think is symptomatic of this asymmetrical exchanges in that period.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think that's it's really telling, right, about the as you're pointing out, the contradictions, um, and there is another aspect to it, that I think it's also super interesting, that about the kind of reconstruction of those objects today, and I see that as a kind of, let's actually make them a little bit more public, for a little bit, but then also let's collect them. Let's make sure that they don't transcend that moment again, almost as if as a kind of freeing it from, right, becoming something else. Most likely, maybe even the contents of some of those things might not necessarily be useful today, or although we still need calculators and tableware, but maybe the tableware actually is pretty beautiful. But I think that process also was super interesting, and I wanted to ask a little bit more about that in relation to the decision of or the collaboration with as well, of taking that just new artifacts into the collection of the Museum of Human Rights and Memory in Chile, mostly because that museum, right, documents the kind of the memory of the violence of the dictatorship and so on. So, and this is part of right, of a kind of something like, this is not about the human rights of people. It's almost like the objects that were produced under Allende's government. So, can you tell us a bit more about that process of creating them for a collection, or maybe if that was a decision that needed to also made after, so like, what do we do with them now, or and so on. So I know there's also super interesting thoughts there.
Yeah. I think it became like a really urgent question to answer, the subject of property, and it was in a conversation with a Chilean curator, Maria Berrios, that in a very decisive way, she pointed out that these objects were not to be owned. That was like the difficulty and one of the critical points of the project. You know, what is necessary for something not to be ownable? I don't know if that's a word. And that I think that also relate with these questions about property, you know, that we were discussing earlier, that you were discussing earlier. So how can you take something that it's material, that has all sorts of value, and take it off that possibility, you know? And the first hypothesis was to explore its exhibition value, you know, and the first exhibitions that were in the context of biennials we're looking for that option. You know, we need to make these things as visible as possible, you know, and those exhibitions were accompanied by press publications, you know, and the project started to gain some visibility. But we realized with the team that it was a very dangerous path, you know, because as we increased its exhibition value, we were also increasing its cult value, you know, and it was almost working against us in terms of people asking us how much, you know. So that was what triggered, you know, this second hypothesis, that this should be that the way to take this off that possibility was actually to donate them to a publicly owned collection. And the conversation, I mean, directing the conversation to the Museum of Memory and Human Rights was also a strategic decision in terms that the Museum of Memory and Human Rights, it's not a visual arts museum. It's an historical museum, and as you have pointed out, it's a museum that collects the material culture of Allende's after story. Yes. Because the first thing that you see at that museum, it's the coup. You know, so it's not the memory of Allende's government, it's the memory of the violent process of the coup d'etat, the stabilization of the dictatorship, the implementation of the neoliberal project, and the destruction of that political, social, and affective project. You know? So for us, it was very important that if these objects were to be part of a collection, we'll achieve, sorry, the possibility to be part of that story. And also by entering that narrative to work as a metaphor for other bodies that were also destroyed and made disappear during that period, you know. So in some way, it's a strange mixture between animism, neo-materialism, spiritism, and communism, you know, that gives these objects a place within that museum and the curatorial projects that they can work with them as a basis.
Absolutely. I will want to, Linda, give this space to you that you have raised your hand. You have another question.
Yeah. Hi, Fernando. It was a great talk. Um, um, I'm just thinking about the concepts that you mentioned. You said haunted heritage and ghostly objects. I think the research is just amazing. I'm just wondering if you and your team have given any thought of if these objects somehow represent or embody that collective dream from back then. What are the objects that Chilean society dreams of right now, or not dreams of, but actually produces? If this is a catalog of the objects that were produced during that time for the dreams that society had for itself, what are the objects that we barely produced right now that somehow reflect who we are as a society. I don't know if you have given any thought to that, or if you can comment on that.
Yeah, I think there's something that relates your presentation with this research in terms that the implementation of a neoliberal project that starting from this ground, it meant the deindustrialization of the modernization project that Chile developed during the whole 20th century. You know, so the deindustrialization of Chile, I think it's something that maybe delivers as a result that, and this is an hypothesis, that maybe today there's no such object to fill that gap, you know. And there's one thing that it's a monster, but I think it's very eloquent of that absence, is that as part of the neoliberalization and as part of the deindustrialization, some of Chilean industries were sold as brands, not as a physical space of as an industrial platform, as brands, you know. And IRT, that it's the brand of the turntable, for example. IRT, that means like radio telephonic industry, you know, was the name given by Allende when they bought RCA, you know, the American enterprise that was based in Chile. So the government nationalized RCA and they changed the name to IRT. And IRT, during the process of privatization of public property in the 80s, was sold as a brand, you know, to an international broker of brands, you know. So today you can buy IRT electronics, you know, that are made in Malaysia and China, and they have the most kitsch designs, you know. So in Santiago, you can go to a supermarket and you will see 2020 IRT turntable design in South East Asia, you know, and it's like, wow, it's yeah, the whole project of modernity dissolves, you know, in that.
I mean, I have a kind of follow-up comment. I don't know if it's a question to more, or comment question to that. That it's that is part of the challenge of was it really a common ownership or common good, or was it really not owned by anyone? Because I think there's another layer of I think of the nuances and complexities of this project. It speaks to the problematics of nationalisms as well, and the kind of need of constructing a national. I'm not sure if I can say national identities, but national entities that were part of a global or international network at that point, right? In this case, is the kind of left socialist axis that is kind of sort of enforcing or enhancing their agenda, right, as a kind of entity. So it's on one side the national, but also the international, right, the international socialists, of course. So I think there is something quite problematic there, in a good sense of problematic, right? Can we even talk about ownership in terms of this, or commonality, or who it belongs to? Because to an extent, perhaps within the agenda project, these are things to be from every Chilean, right? It's from everyone, right? Or it's for, but also from everyone in an extent. That's the kind of underlying premise of it. But there are all these complexities that you're pointing out that really makes it even more complicated to define it as such, right? And if we really think about it or not as something that can be own, or even if we should, objectify those things to be owned or not. So I think it's a fascinating project, and I will turn it back a little bit to Proyecto Pregunta. As a kind of a way of, or segue into beginning to wrap up our session, but also marathon with the project of questions. I think that if I were also to speak about what are some of the motivations for what is going on today here where I am, it is in great part also inspired, motivated by the work of Proyecto Pregunta, which is it is in itself as a project of appearing in public, of asking questions in public, of having conversations that you allow and you mentioned, and I'm so grateful that you were able to also present that and kind of interestingly kind of conclude the day with what we need to be doing is just asking more questions. And not because we don't want to answer them or we don't want sort of quote unquote solutions, but I think there is an important kind of task there for some of us at least. And if I consider the kind of conversation that we have having throughout the day, and I see that Felipe is also here, right? We have discussed all these issues about work and property and sort of belonging to an extent, and I think these questions are crucial to that have been put on the table today. So I really appreciate that. I will pass the voice to Austin, who has a hand raised. So Austin, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. For the first project, I really enjoyed the idea of bringing out these questions, these very important questions, and kind of creating this um, area for discourse. And so one thing that I was thinking about is that very obviously you had these questions all over the world, and even had other people ask these questions in their areas. And so I was curious if different areas had a very strong grouping, or they asked the very similar questions, or maybe there was some backlash to very specific questions in different types of areas or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, having that potential of becoming like a global survey, of affections, it's one layer of the project, and we haven't go deep enough into researching the archive of questions that we have gathered, but just from the actual experience of being there, what has come to me as a surprise is that we are more alike than what we think, both on the bright side, but also on the dark one, people in a hurry are rude everywhere. Nationalism are critical everywhere. The loss of trust in public institutions, it's also spread in a very homogeneous way. So we have been able to find the same problems in a lot of different contexts. And I think that this last call that we made for urgent questions is not to provide a label, because our previous questions were also about some topic. What would you ask democracy? What would you ask your parents? What would you ask yourself? And this one was about what's now, what's urgent now. And there are a lot of categories that we are working on now, dealing with this information, but we are receiving the same questions from a lot of different places.
Irene?
I had a similar question, but I'm more curious about, and you know that I'm a big fan of the Proyecto Pregunta, but I'm more interested in maybe hearing, like, have you as a team or as individuals have detected any type of obviously you talked about reaction and you talk about specific questions, but after these questions appeared, what happened in this context? Have you have able to kind of detect either a change or an activation that came through this questions or this appearance in the locations? Because I think throughout the day we also have been talking about scale and right, what is that relationship between scales, and maybe I think locality for me is very important when I see your projects and when I see these questions. And I'm kind of wondering, after these questions appear and after these spaces, because they're very particular spaces that are activated through questions, what happens when you're out, or what happens when you're not there? Like, have you have a sense of some changes or something specific that you want to share with us?
Yes, yes, I think that I really like in the conversation with Copia when you were discussing about the how to sustain radical practices, you know, and the ways in which your work intersects with the things that enable that work to happen. So there's a relationship between the project that you want to do and the apparatus that made that action possible. So I'm saying this because these activations had each one of them has its own apparatus. You know, at the beginning we were working very independently with like self-motivated activations in public spaces that were near the space that we were managing at that time, and that were related with a very specific community of artists and friends, etc. I think that the second, the thing that happened later was that we started to work with some NGOs in Santiago that saw the potential of a tool like this one to be a vessel for their questions, you know, and their messages. And it was fine for a period, but we didn't want to for this project to be related to just one message, to just one voice. For those NGOs, actually, something may have happened, something in their discourse, but we don't want this project to be framed by that. So we turned toward the arts, and we had a very strong reaction, a positive strong reaction from performance and dance production houses in Europe. You know, so most of the images that you saw are produced in the context of performance and dance festivals. You know, that it's a market that none of us knew of that. I mean, there are no performers or dancers in the collective, but we found an economy that was able to fund a very large group of people traveling and the construction of prompts. You know, so the project was capable, yeah, that was similar to the structure of their funding. So we realized that there was a risk there for our work to turn into something representational. You know, we were there was a risk for us to become the representators of citizen participation in public spaces. So in order to keep the project as far as possible of that, with every festival and with every production house and theater that we work with, we ask them to put us in contact with local social organizations and activists working in specific subjects. We arrived 1 week before the festival. We met with them, we met with their constituency, we developed some of the projects, we scout the places with them, and the material that we, and they accompany us in those activations, and the material we generate, it's also for them to use. No, so we go there, we stay 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then we leave. But some of these groups have created and have keep using the project to move their projects forward. But it's not.
We might have lost Fernando for a moment.
I think my internet was unstable.
But you're back.
Okay.
I'm with Amira. Zoom is getting tired.
Yeah. Maybe I was talking like to myself, like for.
No, it was just a.
No, we heard.
Yeah, almost everything. So, I will just Felipe take the mic, and to the pre-last words, I have some last words, but if you guys, so do not expand it too much. Felipe. You're muted. Okay.
Sorry, that was my first question. Is it still prudent to make a question, or are you too tired by now? But I think maybe it's just a continuation of Tyrene's question. Not that I felt interpolated by Copia's mention, but thank you, Fernando, for your talk. And while you were presenting las preguntas, I couldn't help myself but building a lot of questions throughout the process. And I think that's something lovely about the project, that it somehow triggers questions, as you said. And I was wondering, maybe in line to what Tyrene asked about scale, what or who is it that the questions are addressed? And you talked about like different scales. So maybe if you can tell us a bit more on how maybe the questions challenge, maybe power, maybe they articulate society, or maybe they trigger community, like in those scales, how our questions may be organized, or the reactions, as you were saying.
Yes. I think that there are two very different instances, and I think that this is something that works for every performance piece, if you wanted to see it that way. That one thing it's the performance itself, and the other thing it's the record of that performance, that it's what I'm sharing with you today. So when we are in the activation, what we do is to do one question, one day, one place, and we try to do like 4 or 5 activations during the project. And in real life, we need to be. We have come to the realization that we need to be open to different levels and types of conversations. So there are questions that are very critical, and for that, I think that we use what would you ask your government? What would you ask democracy? What would you ask borders? To activate those kind of debates, and it can get really heavy, and we had some problems, especially in Germany. But we need to mix that with other questions that can be more playful and more related to affections, like what would you ask yourself, and what would you ask your parents, for example. So in the street, we have realized that to provoke engagement, we can't go too heavy on some subjects. We have to mix heaviness with humor, and to keep the sensation of the feel of the project more balanced. On the other hand, when we work with the record of the performance, it depends on the context, and we can go like very, very hard or very soft. when my partners do this presentation, they select different pictures than the ones that I share with you. You know, so also each one of us has its own favorite flavor, you know, inside the archive of the project. And I think that one of the most interesting findings in this process, because we started this project in 2014, has been to look for specific subjects to research. So the questions that I showed you at the beginning that were in frontier, that were located at the borders between two different spaces, was the time in which we realized that we can manage the demand for the project, and we started to send our portfolio to performance, dance, and production houses of performance arts located in places near a border, you know, because we wanted to use the project to activate that debate in those places, you know. So at first we were reacting, and at some point we started to focus, you know, in some and looking for some kind of specific opportunity, you know, like curating clients in some way.
So now I'm going to jump in. So the good thing about doing a 10-hour and 20-minute event is that you cannot. There's nothing you can say, which is right. There's nothing smart or comprehensive or summary. So we will ever stop asking questions. We will not. So I do want to say one thing about as a kind of related to this last presentation, but also a concluding a thought that I think was related to the Taryn's questions to you know, did something happen after the questions were made? And I'm not going to disagree with the question, neither with the answer, of course. Actually, I think it was a really good learning out of what happened. And I think there is for me, there's a lot of value in the performative, right? In the body, in the engagement, in the conversation, and I say that in the context of the kind of oppressive regime of dataification and of everything that relates to the impact and the quantification of how what you're producing actually transform into a larger measurable sort of product that we could then repurpose and repackage for multiple reasons. So I really appreciate that project also as a kind of event that basically asks you to stop for a moment, think about something, and that's it, right? And I think it's almost like that. For me, as a measure, it's like it's enough of a measure, right? If there's something else, it's like fantastic. But I did want to kind of conclude with that as a kind of a value of the kind of body experience, as a conversation, as a kind of casual encounter, which in a way I will try to still think about, even this is, we are graded in a screen in rectangles, as a kind of a casual encounter that I have with a lot of people for 10 hours. So that will be my closing remarks. Thank you so much, Fernando, and all of you for joining and participating, and everyone who stayed up until the end of this. So thank you, Fernando. Thank you, Belinda, and Mira, who are there, and for the ones staying. So hope to have another different project in the near future where we can actually do the other super important part that we will have done after this, which would be a fantastic feast and celebration and drink. So that is pending, but not forgotten. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.